right, we are on air. Welcome, everyone. I call the September 16, 2020 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold public hearings on the Canyon Park Subarea Plan update. The public hearing on Canyon Park will be continued until October 7 and again until October 21. Before we move on the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. Call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so everyone can follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners, and I believe we have all of our commissioners in attendance tonight, so appreciate that. And in addition, Community Development Director Mike Catterman is in attendance. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines for all attendees. Please speak clearly and pause frequently. Please state your name each time before speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live feed, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate that by holding speaker cards up in the lower portion of the screen. I will call on you as I see them. This will help avoid the problem of two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, or second a motion, or participate in debate. And again, please mute your microphone when not speaking. So with that, we'll move on to the agenda. The first item on today's agenda is public comment. And in keeping with Governor Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public meetings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments were submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today and forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. And I believe we do have a commenter who would like to speak in this portion, and Director Cotterman will unmute that person.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have one person who's requested to speak during public comment. So I have unmuted you, Ms. Foley, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Kim Foley. I am a member of Bothell's Arts Commission. I'm new this year. And Kelly Atkinson asked me to represent our group and let you all know that we are actively advancing the arts and cultural plan that was adopted by City Hall. And to that end, we have, I think we would like to create some sort of a liaison with you and stay regularly connected to all aspects of city plan so that as we determine what public art we will be creating and around the city, we could all be working as a part of that together. And that is the end of my my introduction. I just I would like to know the best way to make that happen. If there's a liaison person or how that works with your commission.
Well, certainly we welcome you listening in, speaking up during the public comment portion, and when that day arrives, attending meetings. I guess I'd ask if any of the commissioners are interested in being a liaison to the Arts Commission. We can certainly consider that. Otherwise, Director Cotterman, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. we don't have a formal liaison program between our boards and commissions. What we have done in the past is when we have a particular topic where there is some overlapping interest or responsibility, then we bring the boards and commissions together for joint meetings. And I think there certainly will be some opportunities for that in the future with the Arts Commission. I know we've talked on a staff level about the cultural plan and how we might integrate that into the comprehensive plan. So that would be a logical point at which we could bring the groups together and discuss that aspect of it.
That would be
So
great.
I would suggest that I can continue to have those discussions with the staff to the Arts Commission, and we can explore opportunities for when that might occur in the future.
Oh, I would really appreciate that. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. And I believe you have no other comments, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. I have no one signed up to speak during public comment.
Yes. All right. So moving to our next agenda item, the approval of the minutes. We have before us the minutes of the September 2nd meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? Commissioner Curd.
I move to approve the minutes from the September 2nd, 2020 meeting.
Commissioner Vliet.
I second that motion.
Okay, the motion to approve the minutes has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the minutes? How about we just indicate? And I think we have Commissioner Peastrup. You approve? Yes. Okay. I think we have unanimous approval of the minutes. Moving to our next agenda item, new business. Do we have any new business before the commission this evening?
I have no new business for the commission this evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That will bring us to our next item and the principal purpose of this meeting tonight, the Canyon Park Subarea Plan. I believe we'll start with a staff presentation, we'll start with public comments. We have a number of individuals who have asked to make comments to the commission before the meeting. And we have a new audience member as well. So,
yes, thank you. This is Winston. He would like to be fed.
Well, welcome to the meeting, Winston. So Director Cotterman would like to recognize the first commenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first person we have signed up to speak this evening, if I can get this to work. There we are. First speaker this evening is Roger Belanich. Roger, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you're up, Roger. You have 3 minutes.
Members of the Planning Commission, I'm pleased to be here. I submitted a letter yesterday about parks and open space on 228, but I'm here on the phone to make some macro observations. I was the developer of Canyon Park Business Center, which is the largest in the Northwest under a single development. And I started that in 1984. So I have been following Canyon Park, and my offices are in Canyon Park for that matter. And my observations about the sub-area plan is it's not taken into account adequately the traffic generated by the sub-area plan itself, the traffic service levels of that plan, and when it's operative, and also, most particularly, the plan is not taken into consideration the 405 off-ramp on the 17th, which has a major impact. It hasn't taken into account the Sound Transit bus facility and those impacts on traffic. And so I think the whole plan is inoperative until those are addressed. Furthermore, stormwater hasn't been adequately addressed. The new manual goes into effect in January 2022, and that has a significant impact on the redevelopment of the park. And Canyon Park, this whole sub-area plan is about redevelopment. That's why the Puget Sound Council put it on the map. And it's not really addressing the redevelopment. There's only one vacant parcel in the park, and that's the 11 acres that Teachers owns between 20th and the Bothell Highway. I've been working on that property for 2.5 years, and it's just going nowheres because of the complications of the site itself, having to do with stormwater, and the stormwater manual changes before we'll get development underway. So that's just an example of the only parcel that's available in the business park. So it's all about redevelopment. And how is it going to be redeveloped when traffic and stormwater and new regulations haven't been addressed? Was I interrupted there?
No, but I believe your 3 minutes are up. So if you'd like to wrap up,
Okay.
we'd appreciate that.
So I urge that all the plan be reevaluated for the future, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Roger.
Okay, Mr. Chair, next we have Ann Agard. And
Can you hear me?
yes, Ann, we
Yes, we
hear you.
can.
You have
Okay,
3 minutes.
thank you. I appreciate the staff and consultants recognizing that it's important to use current, updated, best available science for rating wetlands and establishing new buffer standards in this Canyon Park subarea. My full comments were forwarded to you September 10th in a letter. In Natural Environment, page 25, the Planned Action Ordinance, section B2 under mitigation, there are 3 documents. This is page 166 of your packet. Includes references to 3 documents. The Wetland Guidance for CAOs 2016-2018, DOE Wetland Mitigation Part 2, and the Army Corps of Engineers Advanced Mitigation. There are language changes necessary to this section in order. Are you ready to continue?
Yes, I'm not sure what happened there. We had some more sound breaking in, but please do continue.
Okay. In reference these to implement these best available science wetland mitigation, it must be adopted by the city of Bothell prior to approval and adoption of the Canyon Park subarea plan by the city council. And by this, I mean this is referenced in the document that is in the packet, but it is not spelled out as the correct document that should be used. What should be used is the Washington State Wetland Rating System for Western Washington, the 2014 update, the Ecology Publication 1406-29. I've also asked that you include the full document by the Corps of Engineers on Advanced Mitigation 2012, because I couldn't find it anyplace. But what I want to point out is the adoption of this wetland rating system is very easy. It is not a comprehensive plan change. It simply involves the development regulation change to the CAO, and the wetland system itself is 4 pages. It is not complex or complicated. My second request is found on page 102 of the Canyon Park Subarea Plan. This section is called Connectivity and Relieving Stress on Major Corridors. I recommend that I request that you recommend to Council option 2, which is to extend the trail westward, and that this trail extension be the recommended recommendation designated as option 1, the preferred option. The reason for this is that 214th Southeast and the wetlands associated with North Creek are Class 1 wetlands. These wetlands exist on both sides. The shoreline designation exists on both sides of the stream for 200 feet. It's a natural designation. And the wetlands on north and south of 214th are Class 1 wetlands. The environmental designation has significant limitations that make the development of 214th as a connector street with appropriate stormwater improvements very difficult to accomplish. So thank you. Do you have any questions about this?
Looking to the other commissioners, I don't see any questions. And I do think a lot of the testimony you gave orally was also in your written testimony, which we have had an opportunity to review. So thank you. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Okay. Next public comment.
Okay, Mr. Chair, next we have Travis Lynn. And Travis, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So your 3 minutes starts now.
Very good. Good evening, everybody. My name is Travis Lynn. I am the Capital Projects Manager at Geno Therapeutics, at 1522 217th Place Southeast here in Bothell. I'm here tonight to talk about the timeline for implementation of the Canyon Park Subarea Development Plan and its potential impact to our company's future growth. For those who may not be familiar with our company, Geno Therapeutics, a Bristol Myers Squibb company, develops and manufactures cutting-edge cell therapy-based cures for cancer, specifically designed for individual patients. Our team is incredibly passionate about serving our patients, and we're also very happy to be a part of the Bothell business community. We leased our building from Biomed Realty in 2015 with a workforce of about 40 people, and liked the property so much that we purchased it in 2016. Since then, we've grown to provide over 500 jobs and support 24/7 manufacturing operations. However, we've run out of space and are now looking to construct a facility that provides our employees a best-in-class place to work and helps to attract new talent. We're also working to design facilities that positively impacts the neighborhood feel of our campus and surrounding areas. We know that congestion is a present-day concern and want to emphasize that the project we're working on is to alleviate our own crowded situation and not to greatly expand our headcount. To illustrate our current condition, it's not uncommon to walk through our offices during a normal workday and see people standing at file cabinets since no desks are available. Last week, we participated in a pre-application meeting with the city of Bothell, and it was very positive and enlightening. The guidance was helpful, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to exceed the expectations highlighted in the reviewers' comments, and are targeting submitting a permit package in April of next year, and then subsequently occupying the new building in early 2022. As we've been following the development of the Canyon Park Subarea plans, we're concerned with the uncertainty regarding the timing of the implementation and the final scope of the new development requirements, including the minimum FAR, affordable housing requirements, solar requirements, and maximum parking restrictions. All of these pose substantial unplanned costs or impacts to our project. Our attorneys at MHL have exchanged emails and had productive conversations with Director Powderman to address these issues. For example, we've provided draft language for a 9-month transitory window of time when projects that have completed the pre-application process could be vested under the current development requirements. This window will allow property owners to continue to invest in planning efforts without fear that the new regulations will render their plans infeasible. We believe that this is a proven approach that has been provided in other code adoptions, such as the Washington State Building and Energy Codes and in the City of Bothell's Downtown Code updates. We look forward to continuing our positive relationship with the city, our fellow Bothell businesses, and Washington and their team in the coming years. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Any questions? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you. Sarah Gustafson here. Mr. Lynn, thank you for coming and speaking. I wanted to know more about the timeline for the construction of the new building. What would be your ideal timeline here that you are considering? Thank you.
The honest and ideal timeline is immediately, but recognizing the constraints of both developing our internal budgets and schedule, the realistic timeline we believe is to submit for permit in April and then hopefully starting construction sometime towards the middle of next year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Lynn, for your testimony. And we also received written testimony from Juno, so we'll be considering that during our deliberations as well. Next commenter.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. So next we have Donald Jones. Don, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we can hear you. So your 3 minutes begins now.
Thank you, and thank you to the council or commissioners for hearing my concerns. My name is Donald Jones. I'm a laboratory manager for a small business here, CKC Laboratories, here on 23rd Drive Southeast in the Business Park Center. We have serious concerns about the traffic impacts related to the proposed sub-area plan update. The proposed plan would more than double the density in the sub-area with little or no planning for increased traffic flow. Our company has 10 employees, and we typically host 20 or more customers per day to witness and participate in compliance testing. This would include medical equipment for like ventilators. Prior to the COVID shutdown, on a typical evening, our employees and customers spend up to 30 minutes traveling from our location at 23rd Drive Southeast across from the school, North Shore School headquarters, just to get to the I-5 on-ramp. The traffic impacts of the proposed sub-area update plan will not only add to the congestion and delays. How will the roads be improved and traffic congestion mitigated? The proposed plan fails to address these important questions. Bicycles and buses are not a valid solution. Many people commute from Kent, Arlington, Bellingham to participate in our business activities here. Current code suggests that all the road improvements in the park would be by developers concurrent with development. This is not realistic. Beyond significant additional costs, it's not feasible to expand the streets as proposed due to the inadequate right-of-ways and proposed standards that are not consistent with the existing covenants, conditions, and restrictions. We urge the Planning Commission to establish a plan to mitigate traffic and address our public safety concerns before approving the Canyon Park sub-area plan update. That's all I have in my little notes. I appreciate the time and the audience with you all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jones. Appreciate your comments. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. Following up on the comments from Juno Therapeutics, Director Cotterman, could you please tell us how it usually works when a company is doing construction or update and they've gotten partially through the process, they've completed the pre-application process, and then their regulation changes in the middle of it? What usually happens?
Under state law, there are vesting principles and requirements, and projects vest in the regulations that exist at the time when they submit a complete application for the permit. So they would vest, for example, for a project like Juno, they would vest in the land use regulations when they submitted for a site plan application. They would vest in the building code when they submitted a building permit application, a complete permit application that was accepted by the city. So that's what's required under state law, and that's what we practice in Bothell, and that's what's done in jurisdictions throughout the state. There are some provisions that we can build into the ordinance that adopts the regulations, and that's what the attorney for Juno and I have had some discussions about, and I've asked them for some additional information on that related to the downtown plan that was adopted over 10 years ago now. And it provides for some leeway in terms of when those regulations would apply if someone has already done some of the preliminary work. So technically, at a pre-application, they are not vested in any regulations. So what they're asking is that we provide some, I think what they referred to as a vesting runway that allows for a transition period where there's been a lot of work and preparation done based on the existing code, but the code changes before they can submit an application. So they're sort of stuck in a little bit of a 22 there. So we're looking at that. We're evaluating different ways that we can address those concerns.
Okay, are there any other public comments? Individuals who'd like to make comments? I believe the commissioners are having trouble hearing.
That would be because I'm muted. One of these days, maybe by the time we get back together in person, I'll remember how to unmute. I was saying that we have one other person who's on the line who indicated he did not want to speak, but I can ask and see if he would like to speak at this time. So,
okay.
Ian, did you want to speak at all?
Thank you, Director Catterman and Commissioners. This is, for the record, this is Ian Morrison. I'm a land use attorney with McCullough Hill Leary here on behalf of Juno, a Bristol Myers Squibb company. And I would just like to say thank you briefly to the Commission and to Director Catterman. I echo Mr. Lynn's comments, and we appreciate that staff's thorough consideration of our request for a vesting runway for scenarios like what Travis described. We are looking forward to further conversations and hope to be able to reach some sort of consensus that can bring the project forward at the Bothell campus with some predictability and certainty. And we appreciate the thoughtful response from staff to date and look forward to further conversation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. So I believe that brings, okay, so we have no further public comments. With that, I believe we've got a bit of, Commissioner Vliet.
If this is the appropriate time, Chair, I didn't want to address any of those callers, speakers individually, but I have some thoughts with regards to what I was hearing from the speakers. Would this be an appropriate time to discuss or further on in the meeting?
We're going to have a staff presentation, I believe, from the consultants on some of what we heard to date. So why don't you hold and see whether any of this is addressed there, and then we will have time for the commissioners to have some discussion afterwards. Does that work for you?
Works great. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. So with that, I think we're ready for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have two of our consultant team here this evening, Rachel Miller and Bob Bankford with Makers Architecture. I think you're familiar with them. They've been involved in the project, and Bob has been working on the development regulations. We also have from city staff, Steve Morikawa with the Public Works Department. He's our capital projects manager and works with the transportation group as well. So at this time, I'm going to ask Bob if he would be ready for his presentation. And did you want me to run that presentation, Bob? Bob, are you with us?
I'm not seeing him on there.
Did we lose Bob? He was here earlier. Rachel?
Mike, I heard from Bob that he was having connection issues, but he was there a second ago.
Yeah, I remember seeing his name. So I will, let me pull up the presentation and maybe get that part ready.
That would help.
And we will see if Bob's able to get back and join us in the meantime. So is that visible to the commission?
Yes.
Okay.
I just scanned across the ribbon and don't see him.
I'll ask him to call in just with an audio line and see if that works better for him.
While we wait, I'll just say it's glad to see Rachel. I'm glad to see Rachel here. Good to see you. You're muted.
Oh, the muting is slow. I said thank you. It's good to see you all as well.
I wonder if we'll have any children visitors today.
You just missed him banging on the door.
Good timing then.
Bob is trying to call in right now. Mike, do you want me to go through the chart while we wait for Bob? And you're on mute now.
Of course I am. Okay. So yes, let me go ahead and I'll open the other presentation then. Rachel, we can go through that. And okay, let's try this one. So Rachel, I think we're ready.
Thank you, Commission and Chair, for having me again. This is meant to be a little wrap up of what we have talked about with you all back when Bruce was still here and we were going through even the way back in the action alternatives and deciding on the preferred alternative and dealing with all of these traffic questions and how much growth is appropriate and where to put it. So this is meant to be a little wrap up of what we've heard from you all. So next slide, please. And where we stand today. So I'm hoping that you all can peruse this at your leisure sometime after this meeting and see if it's reflecting what you remember as well. But what I wanted to say here is that we've been listening to you all for a long time. We've captured a lot of your views and we have put them in action into the actions that are recommended in the plan as much as we could. So that's what this chart is attempting to show. So where we put the types of land uses that we did, how we set those zoning boundaries, what types of design and where we put neighborhood center streets, the ideas about flexibility for businesses. Those are ideas that you have supported and put forward, and they've made it into the plan. So we hope that you see your voices in that draft plan. Okay, next slide. This was the one on the big picture things. Here, I want to pause for just a second just to note that we have heard you on prioritizing affordable housing and supporting cultural anchors and preserving affordable commercial space. We want to point out what the plan has been able to do in that regard on this slide, and then I'll get to a little more on the next slide. But you see the list in the bottom right cell of all the ways that we have tried to put recommendations into the plan that support cultural anchor type businesses and small businesses, startup businesses, businesses that need low rent spaces or technical assistance or ways of really surviving and thriving, especially post-COVID. So those are the types of things that are in the plan already. And then next slide, please. These orange cells recognize places where we've heard something from you all where we have not been able to address it or we've had to go a different direction. So we want to highlight these for you. So one, on affordable commercial space, one idea that we heard was to consider focusing the mixed use up zones outside of where the current strip malls are to avoid displacement pressure. And that has to do with the thinking behind that concern was that there are cultural anchors in Thrasher's Corner, actually outside of the city of Bothell limits, and then some other important low rent spaces.
Just lost our light.
It's a crazy evening, isn't it?
It's that time of the meeting.
So the strip mall areas have small and startup and independent people of color owned businesses that are important to Bothell community members and the region. So some of the reasons why we maintained the Planning Commission's earlier thinking and direction on where to place those mixed use zones and focus on increasing heights and densities and reducing parking are outlined in this cell. So one of the thoughts was to add more residential in the business park area. Most of that area was the RAC zone and already had 100-foot height limits and mixed use zoning already allowed residential. And it's further from transit. So parking reductions are not as likely once you get that far away from the transit stations. And there really is no capacity gained there. And what this plan is trying to do is increase capacity strategically and in strategic locations to meet the RGC, the Regional Growth Center criteria, and to achieve mandatory or at least incentivized affordable housing, and open up the possibility for other incentives like affordable commercial space. And if there's not a relevant or enough of a capacity increase, then those things aren't possible. So those strip mall areas, though they have important uses now, are some of the few areas where the heights were at 35 feet and there's a significant capacity gain in some cases. Also following other direction from the Planning Commission, what has been important to you all has been the mixed use and vibrant neighborhood centers near transit. That's been a major goal of yours throughout this process. And connecting to existing neighborhoods and really making neighborhood centers for the people living north and south of Canyon Park has been an important goal. And making sure that growth happens there also helps better connect to those areas and has fewer traffic impacts on the area as a whole. We got a better trip generation model and mix of things going on when we put the growth there and not right in the middle of the business park, for example. We also, in the plan, focused less on Thrasher's Corner and just looked at that as a longer term opportunity. And that is where we saw some of the more important cultural, not important, but some real cultural anchors there. Especially north of the city line. So to reduce redevelopment pressure in the near term there, we didn't focus there very much. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of recommendations in the plan that are trying to achieve affordable commercial space and support businesses in redevelopment in other ways. So that's what we've done to try to address that concern. And then another thing that we may not have gone as far as you all wanted us to go. You all did ask us to reduce parking minimums and even to set parking maximum is how we understand that it landed with you all. So the plan still maintains reducing parking minimums and then just studying feasibility of parking maximums at this stage. Next slide, please. Here's more of where it seems like the types of things you've supported along are in the plan. So again, after this meeting, peruse this, please let us know if we missed anything. Next slide, please. And then in terms of economic development, again, these were pretty straightforward things. One of the things that is that you did have questions and concerns about and comes up in public comment is the amount of growth. But we have gotten consistent direction from you all to support the Regional Growth Center and try to meet that criteria, and that is actually an important economic development aim for the area. Strong support for the Innovation Hub as well. Okay, next slide, please. And then I'll just stop on these two highlighted orange cells here as well. We just heard the public comment from Ann Agard. Thank you for that comment. We've heard you all pretty neutral on that buffer enhancement proposal. It's actually in the development feasibility section. It's supposed to make development more feasible while still gaining and maintaining environmental function, ecological function. It is on the table to delete this action. That's where we stand right now. And then there's also been support for building efficiency, and by that we mean green building, like LID and certifications for sustainable building practices and energy efficiency and water efficiency. So there's been strong support for that. But then also you all have said to weigh that with affordable housing and other needs. And so we do have actions in the plan about this, but there's kind of been a hanging question of how should the Planning Commission prioritize all these positive things that are desired, especially when we look at the incentives list. And so we are adding an action in the final draft of the plan. There will be an action about future study using an equity lens to look at the plan and see if there are further actions that should be taken in the future to better inform incentives and any further city investment or changes, again, in the future. Okay, next slide. The other tricky thing is the transportation approach. The short of this one is that you all have asked for the BAT lanes, the business access and transit lanes, to be included in the preferred alternative. And transit has been a very important focus of yours in prioritizing that, and the idea of focusing on moving people and not cars. Our preferred alternative transportation package does not include the BAT lane or business access and transit lanes. We have not proposed converting those exterior lanes over to bus only kind of traffic, bus or business access traffic. And the reasons are that bus service is not expected to improve quickly enough in the area to actually move more people, even if those are BAT lanes. And also, without regional support first and a plan for regional action on this, this short segment wouldn't have that great of an impact. And following a lot of public comment on this, this is a transitioning suburban area, and community feedback is showing that there needs to be a balance, both great transit and the need to be able to get around in a car. And also the general capacity and intersection improvements that are proposed do support transit by moving people through the area faster. For the ped bike things, we think we've got what you needed. There's been a newer addition to add a wayfinding or signage plan. So the next draft of the plan will add an action to do a future study for a wayfinding and signage plan. Next slide, please. In terms of, I'll again stop at the orange slide. In terms of vehicular travel and street extensions, we've generally heard support for that 20th Ave extension. However, the 214th Street extension has been concerning all along. And what we've heard from you all is that you would prefer a trail, but if a street is necessary, to improve 9th Ave first with really great pedestrian and bicycle facilities, tie that with major transit improvements, and provide emergency access. So just a reminder on why the plan differs from that right now. 214th Street extension is necessary to maintain a level of service E on Bothell Everett Highway. The alternate street extension routes, the team looked at about 3 other east-west connections. None of them are feasible for various reasons. This was actually the most feasible location. And the street extension does help transit by improving transportation flow on Bothell Everett Highway. That also improves transit access to the area. So the plan does, though, include your notes about 9th Ave improvements coming first, and emergency access, of course, will be accommodated on any street extension. I believe that's the last slide of that wrap up. So again, thank you all.
So let's pause here, and commissioners, and I see Commissioner Vliet as a question or comment.
Yes, Rachel, thank you for that presentation. I have a couple questions. Could you clarify again maybe consider removing the action with regards to the wetland mitigation aspect? Was that back to that part of the slide? Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the idea behind that action was that there are a few properties in Canyon Park that were developed under previous regulations and previous buffers. So their wetland buffers or stream corridor buffers are narrower than what current regulations would require. So the idea is that where there's already development, and usually it's parking lots closer to wetlands and streams, where there's already development, allow them, if they redevelop, to redevelop on the same footprint they're using already, but in their buffer, make enhancements that would bring them up to the same level of ecological function or better than what they would have accomplished had they used the newer, wider buffer width.
Okay, so we're benefiting more. I mean, the wetlands are benefiting more from this action that we were currently proposing.
The same
if
or
they
better.
redevelop? The
Yes,
same or better?
that's the
And this is
intention
regard.
behind it.
Okay,
It would be a new,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it would be a new protocol, and Bothell would have to figure out a way of making sure that that best available science is being followed and that the ecological function is the same or better as they would have achieved.
Okay, great. And okay, excellent. Okay. And I have to do some more thinking on that because I know we had a citizen, Ann Agard, speak earlier to, I guess, critical areas, and I don't know if the newest ones have passed or they're coming soon. And she was mentioning that Bothell would have to take, you know, I can figure that out later. I can try to do some more research on that. And I guess secondly is just so, you know, I've been on this commission a long time. I know we've been working on Canyon Park for a long time, and I have just a couple basic questions because I know we've done a lot of research. We spent tons of money. Bruce Blackburn poured a ton of time into it, but you know, what did COVID change about all this work we've done? Like, does it change much of what we were deciding before COVID? And the second one that I feel like, and maybe it's going on kind of behind the scenes with community development. I feel like we haven't talked about it much here. I feel like the current business community of Canyon Park is really kind of pushing back towards what we're doing and what we're proposing. And that is a little bit concerning to me because it's essentially a business park right now. There are some residential areas. But the last thing I would want to do would be to deter some of those very good, and I know Bruce probably works with a lot of them, but I don't hear us. We have these people come and speak to us, like at the beginning. I'm sorry, they do comments. Like I think we had 4 or 5 from the business community today, and we've had people from the Canyon Park Visitors Center Association basically opposing what we're doing because of traffic impacts. Can you kind of comment to that at all? I just kind of feel like we're skipping over it. And I don't want to, I want to make sure we're not skipping over it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. In terms of COVID impacts, what we're seeing is that the trend of work from home is potentially more here to stay. So that actually helps the traffic generation model for Canyon Park, that there could be fewer trips. With the feedback from business park members, we have heard the concerns about traffic all along. And there has been interest in meeting the regional growth center criteria for a few reasons. To maintain the competitiveness for transportation funding, a recognition that no matter what level of growth we plan here, it's a constrained area and has challenges. So even if you plan for less growth, you still end up with a lot of trips on Bothell Everett Highway and stop and go traffic. And by planning for the mini downtown environments that a lot of community members are asking for, it meets a lot of other needs and other goals. There's also been a strong interest from the Planning Commission to talk about moving people and not cars, and accepting that the way forward is not more and more lanes on Bothell Everett Highway or other streets around the area, but recognizing that traffic can be slow, and that over time modes will shift. And it takes intentional investment and thoughtful planning to try to make those multifaceted mixed-use neighborhoods that help people make that shift from cars to other modes. And it's the chicken and egg. There's no perfect time to make that shift. A lot of things have to be in place and come online all at the same time. There's been some throwing around of this doubling density, and I think what they're referring to is that the Regional Growth Center needs 45 activity units per acre. And I don't have my numbers right in front of me. I apologize for that. But I believe they're around 20 or 21 or 23 right now. But what I'd like to understand, and again, I apologize, I don't have the numbers. If anybody has them up in front of you, I believe that the difference between no action and the action is not a doubling. So growth was going to happen no matter what. And this plan is aiming for an intentional growth pattern. I also would say that the growth that's planned for and the type of city investment is really focused right around transit. It's the capacity models that we use and where we expected to see redevelopment because of intentional city investment, as well as leveraging the regional investment in transit, was really south of I-405 as one of the biggest growth areas and where we get the most activity units. Eventually, in the long term, Thrasher's Corner, when the area is ready for it, and hopefully after the city and nonprofits and community-based organizations are working with the cultural anchors there. So the growth is really intended to happen right around transit. It's not expected to drastically change in the business park, and that was intentional. The types of uses that are there are using large, low-rent facilities, and if they want to put in tall office buildings, the idea is that they would come in right around transit. Does that get at your questions?
Oops.
Sorry, it does. And thank you for that. I guess I just, and I can hold these comments for a little bit later because I know you're doing a presentation, but I started thinking about it some more. And basically, if we were going to go into a neighborhood in the city of Bothell and say, this is what we want to do, and all the people in the neighborhood came to our meetings and said, we don't want you to do that, we probably wouldn't pursue it. So I'm just starting to think about this more as like a business park and really wanting to get the business backing for what we're doing. And I'm just not sensing that right now, but I'm sorry, I don't have any other comments. I'll hold them for later. So I apologize for that.
All right, thank you. We have a Commissioner Alderks would like to comment.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Aldrich's here. And to Commissioner Vliet's point, I would actually ask Director Cotterman if he could assemble all of the different public comments. If we could do somewhat of an overarching analysis of the public comments that we've received, especially in writing, and if there have been notes taken and summarized of the verbal comments as well, so that we can see if there's any trends that we should be picking up on. We can go off of our memory, but I do believe that there is a way to be a little more systematic about it. And I would really like to make sure that we are honoring the public comments that we've received and taking those comments to heart so that they are incorporated into the plan. That's kind of my general point for now, and I would defer to Commissioner Olson, who is raising her hand.
But first, Director Cotterman, I believe the intent is to do a responsiveness summary, cataloging and responding to the comments we've received to date. Is that correct?
That's correct. On the written comments, the verbal comments, I think for the most part, have been reflected in the written comments that we've received. We'll go back and listen to the tape. We'll watch the tapes and see if there are any others, but I think we've captured those pretty much through the process. But yes, our intent has been, in fact, we had hoped to have it for this meeting, a summary of all the written comments that have been received. We're up to 20 exhibits now. Some of those are a couple of repeats, and there's a lot of consistent comments through there, a lot of them coming from the same commenters, repeat comments. But yes, our intent is to provide those in a summary, as well as how we've addressed those in the draft plan, or how they could be addressed in the draft plan, or whether we think they should be addressed in the draft plan, so that the commission has that information in front of you as you're deliberating and deciding what recommendation you want to make going forward. So yes, that is absolutely our intent, and our hope is, and we're really pushing to do this for the next meeting, because we actually have an extra week between this meeting and the next one. Yeah, there's a lot to compile there, but that's what we're working on.
So I think that will go a ways towards addressing the concerns Commissioner Alderks raised. So hopefully when we have that document, you can review it and follow up from there. So,
and I think it'll be a good refresher for the commission as to what you have heard so far. And you'll see, just in what we've compiled so far, there are not as many comments as you would think, because a lot of them have been repeated several times. So
yes,
but we'll include all of those so that you can see who made the comments, the context in which they were made, and we're highlighting those that are specific, either specific requests or comments that are directly related to the draft plan or the regulations themselves. I also want to note real quick before I forget that the presentation that Rachel did is just in PowerPoint form, but I will put that into a PDF and I will send that to all the commissioners, so you'll have that in front of you as well.
Great. I was going to ask that as well.
And one other point of procedure, Mr. Chair, so I don't forget, at some point tonight, we also need to make a motion and take an action to continue the public hearing to the October 7th meeting.
Yes. So Commissioner Olson, I believe you would like to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Rachel, for the presentation. It was good to get a review of everything we've talked about. I know it started before I joined the commission, and there's so much work that's been done. I did just want to weigh in a little bit about the public comments. I'm looking forward to the summary of sort of the comments we've received. I think it's important, though, to note that we've had so many of the same people or so many representatives of the same group of people speaking at our public comments and sending along comments that we don't want to give some voices more precedence just because they're louder. We've surveyed the community, and a lot of our recommendations are based on what the community wants. So in the report, if we can make sure to include sort of the survey results. And I know I went to one of the open houses that was virtual over Zoom, and I heard a lot of community members being pretty excited about some of the stuff that we've come up with so far as we're working through this. So I just want to make sure that we kind of have everyone's opinions in context and we don't give anybody sort of outsized influence on the process.
Okay, thank you. Other commissioner comments or questions? And I believe our other presenter, Commissioner Gustafson.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Rachel. It's really good to see some of the things that we've been talking about reflected in the actions and really discussed well. I am excited to see the new draft of the plan, so I wanted to know, where is it? When will we get it, first of all? And then I have another question.
I will need to talk with Mr. Cotterman about that first before I give you a precise date.
Okay.
I would like to know the answer to that question as well, Commissioner Gustafson. That's no reflection on Rachel or her team. That's really just us trying to figure out how all of these pieces fit together and when we can bring that to you. But our plan is my goal is to have that to you in October so that you can have a complete draft to review, including the two sections that we have not included yet, the executive summary and the implementation section, so that you've got all of that. You can see what's included, what's not, if we've missed anything, or if there's anything that's not clear in terms of policy language or the analysis that was done, and tell us then if there's anything else you need changed in that before you recommend that to the City Council. So we're working on getting that to you as quickly as possible, but unfortunately, these things are taking longer than we had hoped for many reasons that I won't bore you with tonight.
Okay. And then
yes, Commissioner Gustafson.
My very specific question is something that I've discussed with Director Cotterman. We are modifying the orange residential node to be more specific about the uses of the first floor. And that's something that Rachel brought up in the presentation. The uses of the first floor, as I understand, are required to be commercial in the neighborhood center streets and allowed to be commercial in the rest of the orange residential node. Is that correct? Do I have it right now?
Yes, the primary streets are required to have some kind of active ground floor, and yes.
Okay, thank you.
But just the primary ones. They're very short segments. Yeah.
Yes, and it seems like we've gone through the discussion. There's no way that the rest of the neighborhood would have those, what would you call it, commercial floors if they're not in the neighborhood center streets. Or it's allowed. It's allowed. They could do it, but it's not required. Okay, yes. Okay, thank you.
And I think just to add on to that, we've also been talking about the requirement for that active space. Typically what we do, like in the downtown, we require retail specifically. And we're looking at maybe being a little bit more open-ended about that in terms of what that commercial space might entail. So it may not have to be retail specifically, as long as it's the type of use that would activate that sidewalk. And that gets back to a question from Commissioner Vliet earlier about how has COVID changed how we're looking at the plan. And that's one area specifically because we're looking at what's happening in the retail sector right now and realizing that that's a sector that's probably going to be struggling for a while. And it's going to be difficult to fill retail spaces. So we want to make sure that we're not just creating a lot of empty space on the street fronts in these areas where we're really trying to create that active pedestrian environment.
Okay. Any other commissioner? Yes, Commissioner Aldarks.
Thank you, Chair. I was taking notes. Most of these are for Rachel. And it's just sort of, I really appreciate the overview that you've given us, because then and I don't know if this is appropriate for this meeting, but then I feel like anything that comes up is an appropriate topic for today, like that we can discuss some of those things. And I guess so far we've addressed two of them, which is if we can get a summary of the public comment, I believe that that will be incredibly relevant to both conservation and traffic. And those are the areas where I'd like to better understand what public feedback has been, so that we can make sure it's accurately reflected in the plan. But there's a couple of other items. Oh, I guess 214 also applies to that as well. My question, I have two other questions, and I'm going to go for easy first. Does that sound good? All right.
Sounds good.
One of the, as we're talking about the bike pedestrian transit through the area, I've heard that this relates to another City of Bothell project, which is the Bike Path Comprehensive Plan. Is that, I don't know if I've necessarily seen it mentioned, but from what I understand, the comprehensive plan for the bike path will help us know how to get around the Canyon Park sub area as that, oh, you just all changed position, sorry. And is that true that part of why we're not getting like a clear sense of what the bike pedestrians possibilities are in the sub area plan is because we do not yet have the bike comprehensive plan?
So we actually took a very close look at every street pretty much in Canyon Park and proposed pedestrian and bicycle facilities where they connect to North Creek Trail and connect to transit and connect to neighborhoods surrounding the area. What may be missing is a wayfinding and signage plan, and that would be a separate product. And it looks like Mr. Cotterman might have more to add, especially relating to the ped bike plan for the citywide.
Just to clarify, it is a bike plan. It's not a ped bike plan. I was corrected by our Public Works Department about that, so I'll make sure I'm using that correctly. It is specifically a bike plan for the city, and it is looking citywide. So the Canyon Park sub area would be one piece of that, and we have worked very closely with transportation. Sherman Gong, who you've met and will be presenting at some point. We'll bring him to the commission to give you an update on the bike plan. But he's been very involved in this, so it is coordinated very closely with the overall citywide bike plan. And as Rachel mentioned, one of the things we've heard very clearly from a couple of commissioners is about providing a little bit more detail in terms of the wayfinding for that area. So that's something that we can add to this, and then that would get incorporated, I would presume, in some fashion in the overall bike plan as well. And I know we have Steve Morikawa available. Steve, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on any of that or correct me on anything that I've misrepresented.
Unmute him. Oh, there we go.
So, no, Mike, I think Michael and Rachel, you both got it right. The request last time was to get the Planning Commission an update on the bike plan. So I'm working with Sherman to try to get him there. We're also planning on going to the council at the same time. The bike plan is citywide, and one of the challenges we're having right now is it's very hard to separate bike improvements from road improvements. And you would think bike improvements would be a lot cheaper than a road improvement because you just got to get a bike through, not a whole car or a truck through. But unfortunately, what happens is typically they're on roadways that are not wide enough. And if you got to start moving curbs and gutters, it affects sidewalks and storm drain, and it starts adding up really quickly. So one of the challenges we're having is trying to create almost two plans. One plan that we think would be practical, that we could achieve with the funding that the city likely would have. And the second plan is kind of a long-term one that ties into our design standards. So when redevelopment occurs and they're going to do frontage improvements anyway, we can get a better vision and a longer range for that area. So the one thing I will say is that we did bring Sherman in with his draft plan and work with Rachel to make sure that whatever he had come up with in the downtown on the Canyon Park area, and a lot of it is making sure that North is finished, you can get to it. It all kind of matched up. And again, I will get back to you folks and Michael, through Michael, to figure out when Sherman can come in and give you that briefing.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Alders.
Thank you, Steve. And just putting that all together for us. It sounds to me that the work that is being done on the bikes, the ped bike plan for the Canyon Park sub area also kind of informs the comprehensive plan and vice versa. So those are sort of being developed in concert with one another. And we kind of won't see how it all fits together until it's all fit together. So we will be patient for that. I'm not motioning it right now, but continuing this public hearing as we gather the information to do that is going to be important for me on that regard. But I would like to turn to the last item on my list, and so then other commissioners can discuss what they would like. And that is, I heard a commitment in the presentation that Rachel did to create an equity lens for future policies, that we would begin to evaluate policies in the sub area and how they relate to equity going forward in the future. But I would like to know, is there any plan, and can we move perhaps to look at the sub area plan as it currently exists through an equity lens and use one of the tools that's available to get a score so that we can evaluate and make our recommendations with that information as well. Because I believe that there's a lot of policies that have been written into the sub area plan that we could, if we're making a commitment to go forward, and we have a commitment to address institutional and systemic racism particularly, then we also have to look at the past. And so that is what I am bringing up here, is how are we going to look at the past, especially what we currently have that is sort of in between past and future. It is current. What are we going to do about equity tools in relation to the current plan?
So I'd like to try to give a first answer to that, and certainly Rachel can add on to that if she likes. This is a good conversation. It's also one that I've had with Commissioner Gustafson as well, and I know that it's been on the minds of other members of the commission. It's something that I wish we had done. I wish we would have had the time and the resources to do, and we were not able to do that as part of this plan. It's certainly something that's a high priority for the city going forward. There was some discussion at the council last night, but there was also recognition that it's a long-term process, and it's going to take time to build our capacity to do those things. I will tell you that what we're going to put into the plan as far as the actions would be to apply that equity lens as we work through the implementation. So it's not ideal in that we won't be looking at it from the standpoint of the policies that are put in those places. But as we work on the implementation and we do that type of analysis, that will also inform if there are changes that we need to make to the policies, and those can be done in the future as well. So it's a dynamic plan. It's going to change over time. We're going to learn and we're going to improve it as we go along. I will also tell you that one other thing that I have been working on, and I hesitate to bring this up because it is very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not defined yet, and I can't say for sure if I'm going to be able to do this, but I've been in contact with a professor at the UW to see if we might be able to have a class project that can come in and do an equity analysis sort of as a retrospective on what we've put into the plan. And that may not happen until the spring, winter or spring of next year, or it may not happen at all. I don't know for sure yet. But I'm working on ways to see if there's something that we can do that would at least help inform a little bit more as we move forward and help us more in that implementation. So I know that's not the desirable answer. It's not the one that I want to be able to give you. That's the reality of the situation that I'm working under right now.
Okay, Commissioner Alders.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to Director Kotterman and just express my appreciation for your efforts to do a class project like that. Those kinds of applied educational opportunities are really valuable for young people, and they're also just a necessary part of us moving forward and addressing some of the challenges that have been unaddressed from the past. So I would urge you to continue with that, and I would express my, to the extent that it matters, my encouragement to continue with that. And I would hope that, if it doesn't work out with this one professor, keep trying. And the public policy studies degree program at UW Bothell might be another place to look for a class who would be willing to do that. So please keep looking, and yes, engage college students in that particular study as a way to benefit the work of our city. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that feedback, and the professor I'm working with is actually looking at several different options that we might be able to use, different programs, not only within the one he works in, but also some other schools and even other branch campuses of UW as well. I hadn't thought about the policy one at UW Bothell, but that's one that I can look into. Also wanted, there was something else that you mentioned that I was going to, the educational opportunity, and I would agree with that. I think it's very valuable. But I would say not only for the students, if we're able to do this, but it's also going to be a valuable educational opportunity for me and my staff as well, because this is a new tool for us, and it's something that we have already been talking about and figuring out what we need to do moving forward, because we're looking at a major update of our comprehensive plan in the next few years, and it will be a part of that process, and we need to build that in early to the process. So we're already talking about what we need to do to put those tools in place for that effort as well.
Thank you. So Commissioner Olson would like to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Commissioner Alders for asking those questions, and I really appreciate your answers, Director Kotterman. I just wanted to get on the record that I thought that was really important to talk about.
And Rachel.
Yeah, if I could just add to the conversation a little bit, though a racial equity impact analysis was not part of our scope, I'm excited for you all to pick that up and take it forward following this. And I think your interest in transit priority, pedestrian priority are really important to a social equity lens, as well as your commitment to affordable housing and affordable commercial space and supporting those cultural anchors that are in the area. So you have a good base to move forward with.
And just one more thing, if I could add, Rachel reminded me when she was talking, something that she and I have talked about. In the past, we wouldn't have even picked up the cultural anchors work that was done as part of this process. So it's a small step, and that certainly doesn't mean there's not a lot more to do, because there is, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think that's important, and that's something that that we and our consultants identified as part of this process, is making sure that we do at least recognize that there are those cultural anchors out there. There are other communities, and we need to work on engaging those and moving forward as we work on implementation. So thank you, Rachel, for that reminder.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to echo the comments of Commissioner Alders and Olson, and I also think it's important to express my appreciation to Director Kotterman for being able to acknowledge the shortcomings of the current way of doing things. I think that's really important to move forward, and also to try to take a risk, get it perhaps get it wrong and put stuff out there to get feedback and analysis on it. That's how we're going to get moving forward, whether it's on the cultural anchors or on a equity plan that would be developed in conjunction with UW. It's not the full equity plan for all of Bothell that we would hope for, but it's a start that people can go and then build off of. With that in mind, that's part of why I am asking about when's the plan going to come out, because I think it's really important for Director Cotterman and Rachel to walk us through the plan and point out and say, here is what it means when we talk about we're going to put it in the implementation. Right now, that's a little uncertain to me. Where are we pointing it out to the city council? Yes, you need to think about this in the implementation. This is the timeline that we want you to work with. So I think we're going to need some time to look at that before we can consider passing this plan. I want to see this progress moving forward as much as we can before the vote. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Vliet.
Yes, thank you for the conversation on those topics, and thank you, Director Cotterman, for pointing out the cultural anchors, because we did make progress on that. I don't think a lot of cities have done something maybe that substantial. I know it's maybe that doesn't sound like that big, but it's a pretty big step for Bothell. And I guess a reminder to the commissioners, it is good to ask for a lot of stuff to have research done on, but our staff's pretty limited right now, and we actually just lost a senior planner, and we're not going to be filling that. So anytime we ask for something that's not extremely specific and requires a lot of work, I think we just have to remember all the hours that have to go into all the staff time that has to go into that. And there's a lot of important stuff out there that we're not going to get to. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Commissioner Vliet. I want to agree with you on one aspect of what you said. This is requiring a lot of work. It's a lot of good work that needs to be done. I do want to ask you, when you say that we haven't been specific, what exactly do you mean? How can we be more specific here? Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Vliet.
I guess maybe I would ask for some of the commissioners, and maybe the community development directors is understanding this as well as makers, but I'm trying to wrap my mind around exactly what we're asking the city to do. I don't know if there's a certain type of process, and I know what Director Kahneman said about having a student come in, and I mean, that's fantastic. We did that for the Main Street project too. I guess I don't understand the specifics of what's being asked. I understand what's being asked, but I don't understand the specifics about it. So thank you.
If I could offer something, Mr. Chair. So the way that I would envision this working and how we've done this in other plans here and other places that I've worked is we put together this implementation strategy, and that provides a level of detail, sometimes more specific, sometimes less. It depends on how much information we have. It depends on how much of a priority it is. But we put together that list of actions that are necessary to implement the plan. It's usually a pretty long list, and it doesn't mean that we're going to do them all at once, but it means that we have laid out a roadmap of what we need to do in order to get the plan implemented over time. And again, remember, it's a 20-year plan, and it's going to change over those 20 years, as will the implementation. So what I would suggest for the commissioners is when we come to you with that implementation section, looking at that in the context of the rest of the plan, some of those will be fairly specific, and others may be more general. It may be something like, just, do a study of this, and that may be the action, and that may be all that we need or that we can pin down at this time. Others may be much more specific in terms of, we use 214th, for example. One of the specific actions that the commission has already identified is if 214th is extended through for traffic, then the improvements need to be made on 9th before that happens. That's a much more specific action. So we're going to see a range of actions and specificity in what comes out in that plan. And that's okay. That's what we work with. We refine it over time. So I would ask the commission to keep that in mind as we start to talk about that implementation. And I think Commissioner Gustafson's suggestion about walking through the implementation will be very helpful, because then we can tie that back to, these are the policies, this is how those are going to be realized. This is our path to that. And I think this gets back to something that Commissioner Vliet talked about earlier as well, in terms of some of the concerns that we've heard about traffic. We'll go into more detail about how we think we're addressing the traffic in that area. And it may be that that's not, that some don't feel that's enough, but that may be the realistic answer to what can be done for traffic in that area. And those are the types of things that the commission will have to weigh as you make your decision about what's in the plan that you recommend to the city council. So I hope that's helpful.
Rachel, I think you've been trying to comment for a little bit.
I had understood the question actually to be what specifically is a racial equity impact analysis. So if that was part of the question, then I can give a high level response to that. Was that part of the question? Just generally, what is a racial equity impact analysis? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So just generally, it asks the questions, who benefits, who loses by actions proposed in the plan. So that would be looking at the zoning proposals, the 214th proposal, any of the major actions in the plan, and saying who benefits, who loses. And they usually start with a baseline on demographic conditions, looking at what races are in the area, what ethnicities are in the area, who your demographics are today, and who you expect them to be in the future. And does this plan serve them or hurt them? It also requires authentic engagement and meaningful engagement, and making sure that voices that haven't traditionally been represented in local government decision-making processes are being heard and elevated, and that they're a part of the decision-making process and reflected in the final plan. So that's the part where it's going to happen after the fact, but you'll get an analysis of where there may have been shortcomings. But you'll get a sense of if these actions are benefiting or hurting your current or future residents and businesses.
Okay. Commissioner Alders.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel, I wanted to also address that as a specific question, but to add to what you're saying, if commissioners are interested in understanding what a racial equity rating scale looks like, in the city council's packet that was the agenda for last night's meeting, there is a King County equity tool that is linked in the packet, and so you are able to see what that looks like and get an idea of what that process, how it would be conducted. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments on where we are thus far? Okay, now I believe Bob has a presentation, but perhaps we should consider a brief break before we do that.
I was going to suggest that, Mr. Chair, but before we break, could we have a motion and action to continue the public hearing to October 7th so that I don't forget it?
Okay. I think Commissioner Curd was first, and then Commissioner Olson.
I move to continue the public hearing for the Canyon Park sub-area plan to October, oh gosh, 7th, 2020.
Okay. Commissioner Olson.
I second Commissioner Curd's motion to move the public hearing, to continue the public hearing.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we continue the public hearing until October 7th. Is there any discussion on that? I would suspect not, but okay, all in favor?
And I'm not seeing Commissioner Pystrup.
Oh, did we lose him?
At least visually. Oh, there he is.
There he is.
Did we get a 7-0 on that?
Yes, we have unanimous consent on extending the public hearing until October 7th. And with that, I would propose we take a 10-minute break before we reconvene for an additional presentation and discussion. All right, so I see about 7:30, 7:40, we come back. and we are on the air. I'm going to and I believe we have a presentation we're going to start off with.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So Bob Bengford is here from Makers Architecture, and it looks like we have, looks like he's worked out his connection issues, and we have a presentation. Bob, did you want me to pull up the presentation, or do you want to share it? Oh, he's on the phone. Okay, I've muted him. That's the one. All right. Now, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes. Well, I've heard you the whole time.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that that's who that was. I had muted you. Okay.
But we can hear you now.
Well, I figured the phone was more of a fail-safe technique here, so I was having a heck of a time earlier. So I apologize to commissioners for the, I don't know, I imagine there was some dead air in there for a while when you're trying to get me to talk.
We carried on.
Yep.
So
well, good. Thank you. Okay, so Michael, you're going to share the slides then. Okay. You could proceed to slide 3. I think you have the most recent. Yes, you do. So I think we're just going to pick up from where we left off a couple weeks ago and talk about what we didn't get to. So the first one is hopefully, the through block passage issue, and then the parking, which you talked about a little bit last time and wanted to follow up with some of the specifics. And then the block frontage designations, particularly the map, we talked about it a couple months ago, but now that we had a specific map of designations and wanted to talk more about it. And then we added some supplemental sign standards. And if there's time, maybe following up on some of the base and max floor area ratios and height. So let's go to the next slide. So through block connections, we talked about it a lot, and as Rachel and Michael and I talked, there's obviously a lot of support for it, but the one thing that the code talks about is basically says if it's mapped on here, then it's required when the redevelopment occurs. And so in talking to Michael, he wasn't sure if that was known, and I just wanted to make that perfectly clear that it is a requirement. So if you see all the gray dotted lines on these various parcels down there, so if they redevelop those sites, they would have to integrate one of those through block connection types. And remember, there's options there, so they could do an alley depending on the context, but more likely it's probably going to be it'd be a winner for a landscape passageway or an urban passageway, each of those coming with different widths and different design provisions. And so they don't necessarily have to even be a connection that has vehicle access. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and I think it's fair. And at the scale of urban development, which Rachel's probably showed you many slides in past presentations, that when you break up these surface parking and single or two-story offices with the more urbanized development, you're going to need some form of these connections anyway. That's just how it is. So I just wanted to bring that up and make sure that was known.
Now, we did have a commenter earlier who raised a concern about how this would impact the scale of their development.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is Mike Cotterman. The comment, I believe, came from Sound Transit. They are building the bus base facility, which is located roughly here on the map. And their concern that they raised in their comment letter was that the through block connections that are shown really don't work with the operation that they're proposing, because they wouldn't be able to provide public access through what is an industrial type facility, and they had some concerns about that. So I think that's one of the reasons that I raised this issue for the commission to consider is, do you want to build in any flexibility for this type of situation? And if so, where do you want that to apply? Are there certain areas where you don't want the flexibility, other areas where you do? I guess just a little bit more clarity on some of the issues that could come up and what flexibility and discretion that you want the staff to have in that regard.
Okay, thank you. So Bob, you want to continue?
Okay, and we could do that, and I'll just following up on Michael's comments. For the other larger parcels that don't have the through block connections, of course, we have the maximum block size standards, and there is some flexibility language built in there, so we could certainly add that to the through block connection provision. So let's, I guess, go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, parking. So here are the charts, and it's greatly simplified by a lot of the commercial uses. And a part of that's because, you know, when a lot of people are going to build these new buildings, they're going to build shelf space, and you're not going to know what the uses are. So it makes a lot of sense to make almost all of these ratios the same. So what's proposed here is one parking space for 500 square feet of floor area. And the current is 1 to 300, so that's a sizable change for most of these. And the other thing I'll mention is we had discussion about potentially adding maximum parking standards so that you couldn't go over them. So to create some protection from having too much vehicular traffic. So a maximum could be, again, one of those mitigating elements and help mitigate traffic essentially. And then at the bottom, residential, actually bigger changes there. So currently you have 2 spaces per dwelling unit plus 1 guest parking stall for every 5. So essentially it's a 2.2 requirement. And you can see that we've broken it up. Studio in one bedroom, and the RMUH zone is just 3/4 of the unit. And then it goes up to 1.1 for the residential mixed use medium. And then if you have a 2-bedroom in the RMUH, it goes up to 1.5, and then 3 bedrooms, 2.2, and you can see how the rest go up. But that's what the proposal is here. And again, that's a substantial decrease in the requirements from current provisions.
And I would also just add that most of this area would also be eligible for the parking reduction provision that was recommended by the commission at your last meeting and approved by the council last week. So that could come into play as well.
Okay.
Were you, Michael, referring to then there's the Sound Transit quarter-mile proximity provision, and that once, if and when the station comes in, that there are some state laws that require or allow some reduced parking provisions within a quarter-mile of the station area. So those
yes.
would kick in.
Correct, and that's it is a requirement under state law, and it's a provision we just added to the code with a procedure for getting those additional reductions. And because we have BRT out here already, most of this area already qualifies.
Okay. Next slide. Okay. So the block frontage standards, I went over this a couple meetings ago where I explained that we're going to designate the streets on a block by block basis in Canyon Park. And largely we would draw from the maps that Rachel has presented to you that includes the neighborhood center streets and primary and secondary. So we ended up updating the names of these block frontages to primary and secondary, and there's this new gateway provision, which I'll explain in a few slides, but let's go to the next slide. So here's the map that you've probably seen in the draft code. And so we worked closely with the team to make sure this was consistent with the sub-area plan. And let's go to the next slide where I'll get into some of the different designations. So primary block frontages. So that's where storefronts, the storefront form is designed right on the edge of the sidewalk, and also commercial uses required on that ground floor. And I know that was discussed earlier. So there's only, at the end of the day, there's only two segments here that we've designated primary block frontages. And there's a good reason for that. Again, as Michael was talking about with the COVID-19 impacts, and already before that, it's just really hard to, there's a limited market for ground floor commercial uses. So we always try to emphasize that, stick to the critical blocks. And then of course, a lot of these other secondary frontages allow for commercial, and you let the market kind of dictate that. So both of these two, the ones up at Thrasher's Corner and the other one, or actually there's two on both sides of 228. So if and when those shopping centers redevelop, they would need to put in some primary block frontage forms of development. Let's go to the next slide. And then the secondary, again, match the areas that you called out in the sub-area plan on that one of the maps that you have. So secondary means that you have an option. You can do a storefront, or you could have like a stoop or a landscape setback office or residential uses. So there's the market can kind of dictate. There's also standards for, generally this is pedestrian oriented. So parking, there's some strict limitations on the amount of parking that's visible from the street there, and the details of that in the code. Let's go to the next slide. So I did want to bring up in the areas where the shopping centers are, where these street locations don't exist, and frankly, you need to allow some flexibility, because depending on the development, the exact locations and configurations of those roads may be different. And so what we came up with is this 75% rule. So what that means is that any development there, let's say that you're on the north side of 228th in that shopping center, and let's say that this red line down there equates to 200 lineal feet of primary block frontage. The 75% rule means that you need your project site there needs to include at least 75% of the lineal frontage of that primary designation. So it's kind of close. It doesn't have to perfectly match it. The road can be a little bit different direction, but you need to include at least 75% of that length. And so, and the same thing would go for the secondary street. So you can go above it, but you need to include at least 75% to meet the minimum part of it. And so we think that'll work good for when the plan comes in and there's development review. So I think that's a good concept. In fact, I'm going to use that same concept in a bunch of the other projects that have similar situations. So I'll just keep going unless I'm stopped here. Go to the next slide. So, okay, so this is just a zoom in to that area. So here you can see what we were at least trying to do in this first mapping designation was to have that primary street cross 228 to create this kind of core main street there. But again, there could be other ways that could be accomplished, and it could meet the objectives. So let's go to the next slide. So this gateway designation, we were kind of looking at, well, what do we do with the major arterials? Because we're not going to call, you can't expect storefronts out there on 228, Bothell Everett Highway and Maltby, but you want them to become a little bit more pedestrian friendly, and you want to allow, but you also want to allow some flexibility. So What this does is it would apply the secondary designation at the intersections that are most important, but it would apply this undesignated designation between the intersections. And so let's go to the next slide. I think I explained this a little bit more. Okay, so this is the model that we had put together a while back. And so you could see these purple or pinkish buildings are kind of the mixed use buildings. And so if you look at 228 and you see the two pink purplish circles, those would be where the sort of the secondary type rules would apply. So the one on the left there where the cursor is, that would work, but the one on the right that has this gray parking garage, you would essentially have to, parking wouldn't be allowed on that corner, so you would have to make the ground floor would have to be either residential or commercial, and the setbacks and the frontage standards would have to meet those secondary standards there. So it's a way to really concentrate the pedestrian-oriented look and feel at the intersections where they're most important. So I thought that that approach might work well for this. So let's, again, let's, so that's the block frontage standards, and I guess we've got one more sign standard thing here, and I guess there'll be maybe questions after that, I assume. Do you want me to go through that first, or do you?
Is that very long, Bob?
No, not at least what I was planning. I was just going to summarize what's included there.
How long it was. I thought it was a good break. If it's not too long, we'll do the signs and then break.
Yeah, I could get through it quickly. So the big thing here is that your sign standards in chapter 1222 have, for the most part, they capture most of the elements. But what we've done is we've got some updated illumination standards. They're a little more strict and clear, and you can see the screen capture of the chart there that very clearly identifies which types of illuminated signs would be allowed and not allowed. And then there's some monument and freestanding sign design standards. And also we've got some more detailed projecting sign, marquee / awning signs, and under canopy signs design standards. And these get into more of the design issues where the overall size allotments for all the signs, that all is the same, and that would come out of 1222. And then there's also some wall sign and window sign design standards here. And like for instance, the wall sign design standards would make sure that your sign is, is no more than 2/3 the width of the articulation element of your storefront, for instance. So it's in scale with the building and the actual storefront area. So that's just an example there. So I think they all should be pretty clear. So that's about all I was going to say on that. Any questions?
Okay, so Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to clarify, it sounds like we are only setting prescriptive, can you hear me?
Yes, the lights just went off, but it'll they'll come back in a minute.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So it seems like we're only having prescriptive storefront design standards in a very limited portion of Canyon Park at these primary, secondary, and gateway spots. Is my understanding correct, or are there other spots where we're setting design standards that we just haven't gotten to yet?
Yes, just those two segments where there would be the only places where those are required, but they're optional in all the secondary areas.
Okay, great, thank you. I think this relates to an issue that I had mentioned to Director Cotterman that I wanted to bring up, which is about the crime prevention through environmental design setting and the design standards. I think we've discussed why that's problematic. It seems like we might be able to just delete that from the sub-area plan altogether, because we're really not doing a lot to prescribe design standards. It just doesn't seem relevant here. And again, if commissioners want to go more into the specifics of this discussion, let me know if that would be appropriate here.
I'm looking across to see, not seeing any. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, Chair. Just to respond to Commissioner Gustafson's question for information, I was wondering how street illumination might play into that, especially if it's referenced as a crime prevention technique, that it might have further reaching implications than just that. And so I want to be cautious in not deleting. I'm with you on the ulterior motive behind crime prevention through environmental design being sort of like a little bit, it's going a little bit too far, but there are other aspects that might be helpful to include in sort of this form-based design that I want to hear more feedback about, what things we want to be in that, if that's even relevant to these different designations. I'm not quite sure.
Commissioner Alders.
I apologize. There's a dinner going on behind me, so you might hear some voices. Jenny Alders here, and I just want to, I guess, contribute to the discussion about environmental design and crime prevention. What ends up happening often with these kinds of design elements in cities is that it actually just kind of criminalizes some of the things that contribute to unequitable cities. And so we're talking about criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing being poor, and also increasing the risk of unnecessary police reports on people of color. And so those are the types of things. Hold on just a second. I will quiet the background noise. Thank you. They're almost teenagers. And so those are the kinds of concerns that I have about the idea in general. And I think that if we are trying to take the city council seriously with the resolution they adopted last night and move towards a more equitable Bothell, then there are some compelling reasons to remove the crime prevention through environmental design element from the sub-area plan. I'm not, like, I leave that for discussion.
Any commissioners want to weigh in on this topic? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you. Responding to Commissioner Curd's very good questions, the idea is, well, are you throwing out the positive along with the negative? And I think we can come to some specific alternatives that do not engage with crime prevention through environmental design, which can be interpreted as making people territorial, and use other alternatives here that foster positive public presence. You do want positive public presence to have people feel safe in a space and to discourage criminal activity. And there are ways to do it that may involve street illumination, but they focus more on creating ways of being and doing in a space, attracting people to a space, and also creating buffer zones, almost like the secondary options that we were looking at, in which people can be in a public space without it feeling like it belongs to a particular group of people. So there are alternatives out there. And I think at this point, the question is, do we take out crime prevention through environmental design altogether, which I would like to do? and just leave it blank when we were talking about public safety, or try to put in some more positive language, such as public safety through positive public presence, which gets at, I think, a lot of what you were saying, Commissioner Curd, but without perhaps encouraging the developer who might read this plan to engage in some of the more detrimental forms of design.
Commissioner Curd.
Thanks for the clarification, Commissioner Gustafson. Yeah, I think maybe I was misinterpreting the earlier statement. I'm also in favor of removing crime prevention through environmental design from the plan. When we're considering form-based design guidelines, I think that we can encourage positive public presence without even going into it and like naming it. But yeah, I think I had misinterpreted your earlier statement, so sorry.
Bob, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Well, I'll just say that the block frontage provisions, the recreation space design provisions, as well as all the access provisions that are in the proposed design standards here, essentially promote good urban design with safe, visible walkways, and so all of those things that SEPTED tries to do generally. So I think, if you were to take out, I'm not sure I know the basic SEPTED provisions, but I wasn't involved in the Subarea elements, but I think that in general, these design standards that we have here just promote good urban design and include a lot of the good things that you want for safe, pedestrian-oriented community. So I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, questions from commissioners? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Bob, for the presentation. It was really enlightening to get the end of the story from last time. One of the things that I'm encouraged by is the allowance for flexibility. And so I specifically wanted to address the through block connections in this comment that I'm making, but I also, in hindsight, it also is directly applicable to the flexibility allowed through the 75% provision. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I wish that maybe other jurisdictions can apply for that too, because it's so simple. Anyway, through block connections. We've heard from some of the public comments that through block connections could present a challenge to development of larger parcels. And one of the things that I think I'm looking for in terms of this update is the allowance for incremental growth. And so when something grows incrementally, there's going to obviously be options for these through block connections to kind of naturally and authentically just happen where people are already using them through parking lots. And if you've ever ridden on the North Creek Trail on a bike that has not good suspension, then yes, you also take these through block connections just authentically. And so I am encouraged by perhaps leaning more towards some flexibility on allowing through block connections to kind of come in spurts rather than all at once in development. But at the same time, we know from bike pathways and the network of inadequate facilities or adequate facilities that are not connected together that through block connections really would make sense if they're open right from the get-go and people start using them. We don't want the woo nerf to nowhere. We want it to connect. And so I think that we can probably strike a balance between allowing flexibility, but also encouraging this networking type authentic growth by prioritizing one specific direction. And maybe that's east to west in the business park and throughout the sub-area in general. There's not a whole lot of east-west connectivity. And so if we prioritize that and require east-west connections while allowing north-south to kind of happen flexibly, if that's a word, with the development that is going to occur, I think maybe that's an option for compromise there. So that was my 2 cents, but I'm encouraged to hear what other people think about the through block connections as well, because there's a lot to go and parse through there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Curd. Other commissioners? Okay, now Commissioner Aldarks.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with Commissioner Curd that there is a lot to talk about in terms of through block connections. And so I don't necessarily know if my comments relate to what he's saying, but I am ready to discuss other aspects of that. Would it be appropriate to do that now?
Sure.
Okay.
If there are no other comments on this particular topic, yeah, let's proceed.
And it's specifically related to Sound Transit. It seems like there is a strong reason to give them an exemption of some kind, because a transit center is a highly specialized use of land. And I don't know if we give them an exemption because they're transit, or if we write an exemption for that could apply to everybody given certain conditions and qualifications. And so that's the kind of thing that I would like to discuss, just so that, because we have to prioritize transit in this area. It's so important to improve our public transport options. And so I just would like to know how we're going to do that.
So, Director Cotterman, is there an essential public facility exemption that would apply to Sound Transit? Or
that is one approach, yes. So what we're looking for, I think, from in response to Commissioner Alder's question is, we're not asking you to tell us exactly how we would do that, because there are different ways that we could approach it, but whether you want to do that. So if you want, if the direction from the commission is to look at how we might provide some flexibility or exemptions for certain types of uses, that's the direction that we're looking for. And then we can figure out the best ways to do that. In the case of Sound Transit, Chair Kiernan's point is one that we would probably look very closely at, which is they are an essential public facility. So those tend to have some specific uses and reasons for developing the way that they do. You may recall, I don't know if you were on the commission at the time, but Sound Transit asked for an exemption from the minimum FAR. In fact, they're still asking for an exemption from the minimum FAR because they're an essential public facility. They claim that they should have that exemption automatically, which is not the position of staff. But because they are an essential public facility, there are certain things that we could exempt them from if we choose to do that for that reason.
okay. So, Commissioner Olson, is your question or comment regarding this specific topic? Okay, good, because I would like to get to the question Director Cotterman asked as well, but please proceed.
I recall the meeting that Director Cotterman is talking about, because I was not on the commission yet. I was attending as a citizen with interest in Canyon Park. And I attended with a friend who is an architect. So I don't know if everybody remembers this, but I remember it because Carrie Westerbeck gave a comment about the minimum that Sound Transit wanted to get around, saying, and he's an architect. He's like, you just design your building differently. You have multiple uses for it. I guess what I am concerned about with this comment from Sound Transit that we received for this meeting is I would like some kind of opinion, not from Sound Transit, about whether it would be harder to make their project work, or if it would actually make it impossible for their project to work. I think, given sort of that history, I support Sound Transit. I use Sound Transit when we're not in COVID times, but I'm a little skeptical that it's just not going to make it a little more difficult versus impossible. So that's kind of the information that I really need, not knowing myself, how that plays out, if that makes sense.
Okay. Commissioner Vliet, and then Bob after that.
I would like to say I agree with Commissioner Olson's comments in full. Thank you.
Okay. Bob, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to mention regarding the flexibility issue, I just looked up the language that we used for the maximum block size. So we say there, where topography, right-of-way, or uses requiring a large site / building footprints, that there would be, the director may relax the regulations in that instance. So that's for the maximum block size. But that's kind of consistent with what Mr. Catterman was saying. The other way that you could apply more flexibility is by looking at the, where you designate the connections. But I know probably a lot of work went into that, and you strategically located those probably along property lines and in alignments that you thought were important. I wasn't involved with that, but anyways, those are a couple ways that you can kind of address it.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair,
yes,
if I could try to address Commissioner Olson's question and skepticism. I'm not a transportation engineer, nor am I an architect, but I'm a planner, so I claim to understand a lot more than I probably do, and having worked with Sound Transit on many different projects over the years, I think that the situation here, because this is a maintenance facility, and it has a different type of use than, say, a mixed-use development that they might be using for a parking structure or other type of transit center, that it's a little bit different animal. So could they design it in a way that would allow for this type of use, or even the minimum FAR that we're asking about? There may be a way to do that, but it may make the project infeasible from a financial standpoint for Sound Transit. So I think that's probably the best answer that I have, and that's based on a lot of discussions with Sound Transit and some knowledge of how these facilities work. I think in this instance, it probably would not be feasible for them to do the types of development that we're looking for here. Having said that, we pushed very hard on Sound Transit to show how they could do some additional development on the site or to meet that minimum FAR, to include some office buildings, redesign the site in a way that would allow for greater development, even if it was in the future, that they could show how that would occur. We were not successful in that discussion. So I think at this point, what we're getting is probably what we're going to get there. And we're still working with them on how we can make sure that we maintain that capacity that they're not using, so that we can show that we are retaining that for purposes of the Regional Growth Center, and that we can use it elsewhere in the park, in the sub-area, I should say, the Regional Growth Center itself. So we are still pursuing that with them, and I think they're coming along as far as that approach. But for the specific issue here, I think given the nature of the use, as the director, as Bob mentioned, I would have some flexibility there, but I want to make sure that that's going to be sufficient and that we don't get to a situation where the director, whether it's me or some future director, is put in an impossible situation of not being able to approve a project that is really meeting all the requirements, but is not able to meet this for some specific reasons that are unique to that project.
Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, and thanks, Director, for your comments. That's what I'm getting at in this through block connection prioritization. In terms of making concessions, which the City of Bothell let it be known on record, has made many concessions to Sound Transit already in many parts of our jurisdiction. We're not getting a whole lot of improvement back from them on the benefit side, I don't think, but that's personal. I think that if we set some regulation in the code or in the plan to show the director what the priority is, that will allow the director to have some direction in order to carry out the plan. And so having to make those difficult decisions that's not what we should be planning for. I think setting what we're willing to compromise on now is important. And then that will allow Director Cotterman or future directors to know what was prioritized. And so that's where I'm interested in seeing what the commission thinks about, setting, east-west connections are really important. That's how we get people into the North Creek Trail. That's how we get people into the arterials. And so that's why I think they might be a great way to say, we can't compromise on the east-west. We need those, but the north and south ones, we can be flexible on those, and that can be up to the director's discretion. So that's where my original comment was coming into play, and I just wanted to clarify on that.
Commissioner Alders.
Jenny Alders here. I would like to ask clarification from Commissioner Curd. Your comments are really helpful in kind of bringing up some of the risks of a large project like this in this area, especially when it comes to like how much of a disruption is a large facility like this to trails, to movement in and through the park, if it is, and maybe this is more of a question for bike and pedestrian and not necessarily cars. But I guess I don't have a sense of that area very well to know like how much of a travel around does a person have to do with a facility like this if there's no way through it.
Commissioner Curd.
So specifically at this, thanks, Chair. And just to respond to Commissioner Aldrich's question, this specific facility, there's not a whole lot of activity to the north that's going to be happening anytime soon. It's kind of wetland and area that won't really ever be developed. And so that's why I think these east-west connections are important because there is existing development out. And so there are north-south improvements that would already be made on the arterials and on the connector roads that could facilitate pedestrian and bicycle travel themselves. And so having to go out of the way to get around this facility would be harder if there were only north-south through block connections in this facility rather than an east-west on the southern perimeter, which is approximately where the through block connection is shown on the plans. So that's specifically to this site, the east-west connections make the most sense to be uncompromising on. North-south also because this property is pretty long in the east-west orientation. Splitting it up into several different blocks doesn't really work that well for the developer either, I would think, because in their comment letter, they also brought this up that pedestrian and bicycle travel in between lanes of bus storage and maintenance might not have the best aesthetic either. So could bring safety issues up too. So that's why I hope that clarifies a little bit on why I think east-west is important here, because there's already a lot of north-south infrastructure that would be planned I think east-west connections are more important, but that's my take on it.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson.
Could we see the map again where we can take a look?
Through block connection figure.
Sorry, please and thank you, by the way.
Okay, so I think this is the map we're talking about. And just for everyone's benefit, could you identify the Sound Transit property of interest? Oh, still jumping. And
so the Sound Transit property is 12.5 acres, roughly right here. So there would be, the proposal is for 2 through block connections north-south, and one on the north side, one on the east side, and one on the south side. And this is, getting to Commissioner Curd's point earlier, the south side is something that I think we've identified in the past for a future street as a possibility to provide this connection through, because right now this street ends here. So there's really no connection at all through this. And as I recall from the Sound Transit letter, they were not opposed to providing pedestrian facilities around the property, but it was just through the property that was their concern.
Okay.
Is this the map, Commissioner Olson, that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I just wanted to reacquaint myself with the sort of the size of the project and where in the sub area. It's just right in the middle almost.
well, as was stated previously, there is some significant wetlands to the north of it.
This is the North Shore School District bus maintenance facility. This is the City of Bothell Operations Center, and these are all the wetlands here. This is Fred Meyer. And recall, one of the proposals is to extend 20th all the way up to Maltby Road.
So,
sorry.
No. So I heard Director Cotterman ask for a sense of the commission regarding providing some flexibility in these requirements. And I also heard Commissioner Curd suggest that there may be some prioritization of where flexibility may be allowed and may not be allowed. Is that a fair summary of both? And with the ribbon, Commissioner Curd dropped off my view, so I'm not seeing. There you are. Okay, I moved and I saw a thumbs up. So can we, Commissioner Olson?
Sorry, it's me again. So I wonder if we could, in our hierarchy, sort of say, you know, if there's a sort of a public need, it sounds like that's the term we're using, you know, maybe on the outside of their facility, you know, they have these pedestrian and bike access points, but maybe they also need to provide, I don't know if more public open space is what I'm looking for, but something cool to make up for it. You know what I mean? Something that helps build the surrounding area a little bit.
Some mitigation.
Yeah.
Okay. We can certainly look at that, yes.
Okay.
And I guess one of the other, to maybe ask a more specific question of the commission along this line. Commissioner Curd talked about east-west priority versus north-south. Another question I have is, geographically, is there a higher priority for the mixed-use areas that we're talking about versus some of the employment areas? And I'm going to look to Bob to weigh in on that, because I know one of the reasons that we talked about these is because they are usually larger parcels and we're looking to break them up a little bit more. So I don't know, Bob, if you could talk a little bit about your perspective on the mixed use areas and the importance of the through block connections there and how those function versus how they might function and their importance in the employment areas.
Sure, I would just say that the greater the density, the more important they are. not much more than that. And I would, I have to look back and see how we did the block standards and see if we differed that by the different zones. For instance.
Yeah, I think we had larger block standards.
Yes, we did.
If I recall.
Yeah, so we had 1,800 block perimeters in all but the E zones, and then they increased to 2,000, 2,400. So I think that's a good way to go, is by your zones, and especially in the employment zones or in the low zones. That could be part of your criteria, that they get more flexibility, or maybe there's just fewer connections that you designate on the map in those areas. That'd be my suggestion.
Okay. Commissioner Gustafson and then Commissioner Alders.
Hi, Sarah Gustafson here. I think this has been a really interesting discussion about how much Sound Transit is getting and whether it is justified based on the service they are providing to the community. My first question is, if we provide flexibility to Sound Transit, does it present precedents that other businesses or warehouses, operation centers would then use to claim the same exemptions? And I have another comment, but maybe I'll just let that one be answered by the director.
So thank you for the question. I think the answer is, depends on how we write this. If we're making it specific to Sound Transit, then we would most likely do something related to the essential public facility designation. The broader question that I think that I'm looking for some direction for is whether we want to build in flexibility more generally for uses, whether they're by zone or the area that's being served, or just the type of use that may go in there. So it isn't specific to Sound Transit. They raise the issue, but I think the issue may come up in other projects as well.
So let's pause and get a little feedback on that. Well, no, I said I would recognize Commissioner Alders, so let's do that. And then I'd like to get some feedback on where people feel on the flexibility question.
Thank you, Chair. I might be going to the feedback part and saying that I'm ready to give feedback. So I will be the first one, and then I hope that there are other commissioners who will join in. It seems to me through listening to this conversation, and I'm grateful for the quality of the conversation around this, and I'm just going to gently tease Commissioner Gustafson here for saying how interesting this is. She's right, it is, but we also are in a planning commission meeting. So, you know, kind of, this is the audience, right? Okay. I enjoy being here with you all. That's what I'm saying. I feel like the conversation is kind of around this low density usage. And that's where I sort of feel like that it's sort of beginning to center around. And I guess I think that there will be other low usage developments that will be coming into this area that might want some more of this flexibility. I guess I could ask what are other low usage developments that we might attract to the area, and who we then, my understanding though is that if we're going to have a low usage area, those are the reasons why we have these through block connections, is to kind of beautify the usage of those developments. And so I think I'm leaning more towards the, what did you call it? The not the public good thing, but the
Essential public facility.
Essential public facility for Sound Transit, so that we're not trying to allow low usage facilities from getting around some of the design elements that we're looking for. So I think that's my 2 cents for that. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Vliet.
I'm all for flexibility and also in support of Commissioner Kurd's ideas of prioritizing the east-west connections. Thanks.
Okay, other commissioner comments on flexibility, and then other. Commissioner Gustafson.
Sarah Gustafson here. Yes, I'd like to echo Commissioner Aldrichs and Commissioner Vliet on what they've said so far, limiting it to Sound Transit, keeping those east-west block connections. I think the big issue I want to bring up is that a lot of our constituents really think that we're giving a lot to Sound Transit here, and they want to see something back. As Commissioner Olson was saying, if we exempt them from the north-south connections, well, what would the city get in return? Maybe Sound Transit could do all the signage that we've been talking about for the through block connections and the bike trail. They're good at signs. And I think they brought up a really interesting idea about transfer development rights. I mean, Jenny, we're getting really wonky here, but with transfer development rights, I think they'd basically get the right to stay small and then donate that right to other businesses in Canyon Park to grow larger. Well, Sound Transit really wins on that one. They get a lot from transfer of development rights. So if we are going to go down that route with them, we really need to talk with them about what they're going to give back to the community based on what our constituents have been saying. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Kurd.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the comments of Commissioner Gustafson, and I'm actually not. I'm against granting special provisions for public facilities, mainly because I've seen in other jurisdictions. In Boston, there's a library, which is a essential public facility, perhaps, that has affordable housing on top. And in Vancouver, British Columbia, there's a fire department with a shelter for single mothers up on top of it. And so I feel like if we don't, or if we start handing out essential public facilities for anyone, we're going to get into more of this kind of low density area within our regional growth center that we can't really assume that transfer of development rights or other qualifying transfers or compromises are going to still retain what we need for this to be a functioning neighborhood. And so I'm going to stick with my original opinions on flexibility, is that we need to be very specific in giving direction to the director on what we want to prioritize, and then leaving it up to the director for the remainder. So I would be in favor of east-west connections, like I said earlier, and possibly also density-based direction as well.
All right, and I believe Director Cotterman has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to try to summarize what I think I've heard from the commission in terms of some consensus, so that we can move on to the next item here. So what I've heard in general, and I think there's consensus on this, is that some flexibility in certain circumstances would be acceptable. Not necessarily granting an outright exemption to an essential public facility like Sound Transit, or any facility for that matter. And if there are ways that we can look at providing some flexibility, but making sure that there's some offset or mitigation for that, then that would be something that we could work into this. So I think that achieves what I was hoping we could get to, which is providing some flexibility, some discretion at the director's responsibility but under certain circumstances and with some guidance on how that would work. And I have some ideas on how we might do that. So we can bring that back to you. I think there's a way to put that in place that would be workable. So if that's okay, if everybody's okay with that, I think I heard some consensus around that.
So is there general consensus around director proceeding in that direction and coming back to us? Okay, yeah, I see.
And kind of what I have in mind is a combination of what Bob presented in terms of that 75% rule, and then maybe some opportunity to provide a mitigation through a cash payment or something like that that could be used towards pedestrian improvements elsewhere in the sub area. So that's my initial thinking on it, and I think that would address most of the concerns that I've heard this evening.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to close the loop on the SIPTA discussion. I know it's been a while. I was hoping to get that in, but we moved forward a little fast. It seems like there's at least 3 commissioners who would like to remove that. Should we just have a straw poll here to see if we take that out?
Are you talking about the SEPTED?
Yes, I was hoping to close that loop, but
You're
we
right.
moved forward.
We sort of moved on from that one, didn't we? I think what I heard on that, and again, you can tell me if I missed something here, is I think there was general. I didn't hear any opposition to removing the reference to SEPTED and providing some reference to what would be good urban design that would create the things, the positives that we want to create in those spaces. Is that a fair statement? And we can find some wording to do that. I'm seeing.
That sounds great.
Head nodding. You want to be able. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
I think
you.
we have consensus there. Other issues related to the Canyon Park sub-area plan, recognizing we have several more meetings of this ahead of us. Commissioner.
Bob, did you have any more presentation this evening?
No, unless the only other thing was that follow-up on the FAR, but I don't know if you want to get in that or if there was any further discussion tonight on that. That was the only other thing that I had a question about.
Okay. Well, if I don't know if there's more discussion that the commission wanted to have on other things tonight. If not, we can bring that up next time if you'd like.
Okay. I thought I see 2 commissioners. Commissioner Gustafson first, and then Commissioner Aldarks. I believe was the order that the flags went up.
Thank you. The things that I think we have left on the agenda are, I had a short presentation on the Thrasher's Corner cultural anchors, maybe 5 minutes, that I wanted to give, and that also loops into the subject of the goals presented in our executive summary on the Subarea plan, page 4, as well as revisiting the conversation on developer incentives. So 3 things there. I'm wondering how we can structure that into meeting time.
Okay. Well, why don't you launch in and we'll see, recognizing we have about 14 minutes until we need to adjourn or extend.
Okay, do we want to, I noticed Commissioner Aldarks had her card up. Do we want to go into that first, though, before I launch in?
Commissioner Aldarks, would you like to make your comment?
Sure, thank you. I actually think that we can defer it to another time. It was specifically about redevelopment at 228 around those intersections and what the effect on redevelopment is on some of the small businesses that exist there, and how do we help small businesses stay in their locations as redevelopment happens. But it's a bit like that. Like I said, we can discuss it. It'll come up again, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you. So, Commissioner Gustafson, would you like to take a few minutes and talk with us about your issues?
Great, thank you, Chair, for this time to speak on the immigrant businesses in Thrasher's Corner. So I'll explain why.
And we went dark, so keep going, we can hear you.
Great. I'll explain why I did this research, what I found, and some implications for the sub-area plan. So the first question is why? And at the last meeting, Director Cotterman and I had a discussion, and it was along the lines of me saying that we need an equity and outreach framework. And Director Cotterman said, we're working on this. And in the meantime, please try to do your own research, bring in things that we can work on right now. And trying to, in good faith, bring in some of my own personal research here. So thank you, Director Cotterman, for that recommendation. So this does not replace outreach, but it might bring in some future questions. So Thrasher's Corner has about 30 small independent businesses, half in Snohomish County and half in Bothell. And most of these seem to be recent immigrants: restaurants, beauty, health, grocery. So I did a grocery shopping trip myself, and I read some reviews online. So one thing I wanted to note is just how much the size of these businesses seems to belie how many people actually use them. For example, Apna Bazaar, which is in Snohomish, is about the 10th of the size of Fred Meyer. But if you look at the Google reviews, you'll see that it has 600 views, while the QFC has only 300 views. So a lot of people are going there. And one interesting things about Apna Bazaar and Mayuri, which is another grocery store also with about 400 reviews, is that people were talking about buying meals for religious holidays, about the halal meat that has been provided there. So it's important for the religious community. I'd also like to move to talk about the international market, which is in the city of Bothell, which is affected by the Thrasher's Corner rezoning. It's an Eastern European grocery. It's smaller. It has only 40 reviews, but I feel a little bit more comfortable like really analyzing those reviews because my husband is Russian, so perhaps I have some basic competency. And one thing that surprised me is that the most glowing reviews, people saying, hey, this cheese and these candies and these pastries are so scrumptious, they are people who appear to be outside of the ethnic group in question. And that pattern seemed to be the case in the other shops in Thrasher's Corner to some extent. People seem really overjoyed to have this window on the world in their communities. So here are the implications I think this brings for our sub-area plan. The first one is in our executive summary. We talk about vibrant and multifaceted communities. And vibrant, I feel, is almost overused in urban planning discussions. What does it really mean to us? And I would spell it out like this. I would say vibrant places are diverse places. Let's celebrate and support Canyon Park as a hub for recent immigrants, if we feel that's the appropriate wording. And I would go further, of course, based on our city council discussion last night. I would add create spaces that are anti-racist, welcoming, and safe for people of all races, religions, colors, abilities, and sexual orientations. That's my first implication. The second implication is about those religious holidays. When I hear about holidays, I think about transport. I don't know, I'm a geek. But that made me think about, well, what are chained trips taken by people in this community after religious services? Do they go shopping? Do they do recreation in the parks? What trails do they use? Is this all via car? Are some of these celebrations actually taking place in parks and so forth? Questions that could be included in outreach. And third is affordable commercial space. I think we really want to see this as an incentive, but I think it's trickier even than affordable housing, where you base your eligibility on AMI. But for businesses, they don't really have AMI. So how do you decide who gets the space? Do you want to shape incentives that could keep local businesses here, even if rents go up? Neighborhood preferences, those are really tricky, but perhaps that's something we want to look into. And finally, if people are thinking, well, one commissioner on a shopping trip. That's pretty limited. That's pretty limited information to draw all this from. You're right. And that's why the outreach framework that Director Cotterman is working on is going to be so helpful here. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Gustafson. Any questions from other commissioners? Commissioner Alders.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Aldrich here. I will just recognize the thoughtfulness and effort that Commissioner Gustafson put into her presentation. I especially like analyzing the reviews and understanding that that is a good marker for the, I guess, the significance of these locations in our communities. And, you know, thank you for doing that. And thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think that unless there are any other questions, that may bring us to a good point to end this discussion for tonight, recognizing it will come back several more times. So moving along on our agenda, study session, we do not have one tonight. Any old business to address?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Reports from staff, and I think we may have one or two here.
Yes, and one of these may have actually come under old business, but I'll just do it all under staff. Again, thank you. I thought this was a really good discussion this evening. Thank you, all the commissioners, for your input. This has been very helpful. I sort of wince a little bit every time the chair says we'll have several more meetings on this, because we're trying to figure out how to minimize the number of more meetings that we need to have on this. It's really important that we bring this to a conclusion at the Planning Commission so we can get it to the City Council. And Rachel and I are working on just how we can do that to bring you the information you need to make that recommendation. So we're continuing to work toward that. And the guidance that we got from you this evening is very helpful and really helps move us forward on that. Two things I wanted to mention. There was a couple of references this evening to Bruce Blackburn's position, the senior planner position that's currently vacant due to his retirement. And I have been given approval to go ahead and start the process to fill that position. So I just want to let you know that that will be filled. Hopefully by the end of the year. It may be a lengthy process. We'll see. I'm really trying to get a really good pool, a wide and diverse pool of candidates to consider for that. We're advertising nationally as well as locally. So we'll keep you posted on what's happening with that, but we are moving forward. At least that's the good news. Also wanted to mention that the City Council not last night, but was it? No, it was last week, Tuesday. Help me here, Commissioner Kurd. Was it last week? It's all running together for me.
It was last week, yes.
Thank you. It was last week. Okay.
A week ago Tuesday.
They all the Tuesdays run together sometimes. The Commission's recommendation on the reduction in parking and the affordable housing incentive was approved by the City Council. As I mentioned last time, the staff had recommended that we not increase the market rate radius to a half mile yet, because we wanted to see if there's a way we could use that to leverage some additional affordable housing. The council asked some questions about that. They also asked Commissioner Kurd to speak to that, and he did an excellent job explaining the Commission's deliberations and the discussion on that particular item. So thank you, Commissioner, for being there and for providing that insight. I think that's very helpful for the council to hear what the Commission's considerations were in that regard. Ultimately, they did approve the change that the staff had recommended, with the understanding that that will come back in the docket as something that we'll look at as part of the docket for next year, and the council can decide whether how high a priority that is, because they didn't want this something to languish. They generally, I think, are favorable towards increasing it to the half mile. And again, that was just for the market rate. Everything else the Commission recommended was approved by the City Council. So those, I believe, were the main things. There were also, if you were watching the council meeting all last night, at the beginning there was a proclamation and a recognition by the council for Bruce Blackburn, which was really nice to see. Bruce was very, very grateful and pleased, and well deserving of all the kudos that he got from the council last night. We also did a fun little video bomb. I had a bunch of the CD staff on a separate Zoom call that I then shared on a screen share with the council. So they were all waving at Bruce, and during that, that was the one surprise we were able to pull off for the proclamation last night. So Bruce seems to be doing very well in retirement, and I'm very happy for him. And I curse his name every day when I have to do more work on Canyon Park without him. So. But very happy for him, and glad that he's doing so well. And that's all I had, unless, Mr. Chair, you wanted to mention the next meeting. Are you going to be available, or do we need to?
I do have I do have a significant personal matter I need to attend to during the next meeting, so I won't be able to chair the meeting. If Commissioner Curd is available, I would appreciate it if you could take the reins.
I'll be here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Unavoidable, but necessary. So thank you. With that, I see we have about 2 more minutes. Any other reports from members? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is going to be quick, but if anybody's still tuned in, then you should go over to the city's website for the virtual open house for the 2021 Storm and Surface Water Master Plan update. So the city is requesting feedback on stormwater update, and they have their plan out for comment, and there's opportunities to respond and connect with the city on that. So just wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Thanks for the plug, and I'm sure Public Works appreciates that as well.
Okay, other reports from commission members. Hearing none and seeing us arriving close to our appointed time, I would look for a motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved by Commissioner Olson. Do we need a second for that, or?
Yeah, generally, yes. If you're
yeah, so, okay, Commissioner Aldorks. I see a second from Commissioner Aldorks. Okay, all in favor of adjourning? And it's unanimous. We're all ready to be done. So thank you all for your attention tonight. I think we talked about a lot of very important and interesting things, and we will try to bring it to conclusion fairly soon. Good night, all.
Thank you.